Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Minister Thoko Didiza has hosted BRICS Ministers of Agriculture in a meeting to promote sustainable and fair growth between member countries, held under the theme Strengthening Collaborations Towards Sustainable Agriculture Production and Increasing Productivity. That meeting centered around food security, climate change, rural development, economic challenges, poverty and population growth. In fact, the Minister joins us this morning to unpack, Minister Thoko Didiza, a whole range of the issues discussed in that meeting. Good morning, Minister. It's great to see you. And they are wide-ranging, aren't they? That was quite a mouthful of an introduction that I read. But I wonder, outside of these big topics that we are discussing, on what is an incredibly important issue, not only here at home, but on the continent as well, what are some of the practical ways in which those discussions translate into the everyday lives of people?
Thank you very much, Michelle, and indeed it was a great and elaborate introduction you made, which is indeed important because when the Ministers of Agriculture of the BRICS countries met, they looked at those issues. At the center of them is how do we continue to provide enough food and fiber for our populations, taking into consideration the challenges of climate change, because that will ensure that the way in which as countries we adapt and make sure that agriculture remains resilient will provide food and fiber for our populations. At the same time, we also looked at what are the practices in terms of our production systems that we need to put in place to make sure that we can indeed take care of our finite resource, which is the land. Interestingly, Michelle, these are some of the practices that our old grandmothers and great-grandfathers used in the past, where you actually do rotation and what is known in other jurisdictions as regenerative agriculture. But at the same time, is to ensure that you utilize the land on what is suitable, rather than to actually be driven by commercialization at the expense of management of our land and water resources. We've seen also the role that technology can play in this regard, because as climate change hits the agricultural sector, you realize that sometimes there are prolonged droughts, and therefore you need varieties in terms of seeds that can actually ensure that the crops you produce can withstand the droughts that we have, but also early warning systems to make sure that your farming community is alerted on time on changing weather patterns so that they can be prepared early.
It sounds, Minister, if you don't mind me coming in there, it sounds very much that education is also going to be key to try and implement the kind of things that you've just discussed with us.
Education will be more important, not only for those who produce, but also for communities on how we can manage our resources. Secondly, research and development will become key in order for us to look at innovative ways, scientifically proven, and thirdly, technology transfer will equally be important to make sure that we support our production system in this instance.
Minister, when you talk about early warning systems, when you talk about the kind of intervention that we need insofar as mitigating climate change, does this mean that the interventions that are being proposed here will be in the form of technology, in the form of technical equipment as well, farming equipment as well? And if so, where does that money come from, Minister?
Well, firstly, it is important that early warning systems are integral part of our system, both as government as well as the private sector. For instance, our weather services give us information on the daily basis on what is the weather forecast in a day, in 10 days to come. What is important, it has to translate that information so that it's user-friendly to farmers in the language that they can absorb, and they can actually plan ahead knowing exactly what are the likely weather patterns going to be going forward in order for them to prepare.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important for me to say, besides the issue of climate change, it was sharing information and experiences on rural development, because I want to believe that our rural communities, if we do put interventions that make sure that those areas become economically viable, it will actually improve the quality of life of our rural citizens, not only in our country, but also globally. The third element was the issue of trade. And I'm happy that just following our ministerial in the state visit that we had 2 days ago with the Chinese government, we signed a protocol on avocado, which now allows South African avocado producers to export to China if they so wish. But that is also important for earning our export revenues, which is also good for the country. But it's also a good incentive for farmers if they know that market access opportunities, both domestically as well as internationally, is open for them to be able to trade amongst each other.
Minister, we've been marking Women's Month here in South Africa for a whole range of reasons, one of them being some of the challenges facing women in various sectors. And that's true for many other countries on the continent, right? Issues around women-led households. We know that the bulk of our households in our country are led by single women. Did that feature insofar as agriculture and the kind of intervention that you're proposing and that this meeting proposes?
It did feature. You would appreciate that when you talk about agriculture, and in particular smallholder farmers, that's where you'll find women in South Africa, in our continent, but also among the BRIC member countries. And therefore, it was an integral part of our discussions to say, how do we ensure that this sector is inclusive, both in terms of gender as well as issues of diversity in terms of race? Because you will appreciate that women in a number of our countries have challenges on the issue of access to land, on the issue of access to financial resources, are the same issues that we're grappling with here in South Africa, and these are the matters that we actually deliberated upon amongst the BRICS countries.
There's no doubt that there are some serious and important conversations taking place at the BRICS summit, as has been the case not only of the past 3 days, including today, Minister, but also in the preceding events before the BRICS summit happened. The one thing that I want to ask you, Minister, is what the timelines are insofar as these important discussions and the implementation of the resolutions are concerned. Because there is no BRICS secretariat, right? So the day-to-day running of BRICS nations, the day-to-day sort of admin, for lack of a better term, is not at the moment being done. What does that say to us in terms of implementation, Minister?
Michelle, if I were to just share with you, when a country takes this chairship, like South Africa is taking over the chair of BRICS in this year, we actually provide the secretariat, ensure that we follow up on the issues that were discussed and agreed upon in terms of the declaration. We convene technical meetings in between to pursue those matters and take stock of how far we've gone. For instance, if you look at one of the issues that were discussed in the summit, the issue of rural development, actually China, from whom we've taken over the chairship, that was one of the issues that they actually brought into the table. And South Africa, as it took over the chairship, followed up on that issue. So we don't lose the issues because we have lost the chairpersonship. But also the fact that you do not have a standing BRICS secretariat is not so much of a hindrance on how you pursue the issues that have been discussed and how those can be taken over and implemented, because issues of implementation must happen at a country level, which therefore means as ministers and the administration, we need to make sure that those issues become part and parcel of our policy, of our programmatic intervention, as well as what space in terms of regulation, if any, that might need to be changed. That would have to happen at a country level, but also at a multilateral level, where we engage, such as in the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is one of the UN bodies that is responsible for food and agriculture. We actually look at how we can align our position, and if some of the issues that we feel strongly about can be lobbied to make sure that they are on the agenda of the multilateral institutions, we do so.
Yeah, that certainly will be the hope, Minister, and in the months to come, it'll be interesting to see how these things come to fruition. Agriculture Minister Thoko Didiza, let me thank you for your time this morning. BRICS nations agreeing to collaborate on sustainable agricultural production.